Alright, so we're going to talk about the ALG AK triggers. Recently there's been some issues. It's actually been going on for quite a while. Um, Thought it was pretty much isolated to some arsenals, but we had a member in our group that owns a gun shop earlier this week, I believe. He had a customer came in and he had the ALG trigger that failed on him in a Vepr. So that got us thinking that maybe we should look into some of our rifles and see if we see any signs of this problem. Now, first to talk about what the problem is, if you look at the ALG trigger itself, the disconnector here has a tail on the very back end here. It actually extends past the housing of the trigger quite a bit, and when the hammer's resetting, that comes down below it even further, and it's impacting on the rivet on the rear end of your trigger guard and the receiver there. And now what this is doing when it does that is it's creating leverage, and on the disconnector itself there's a hole, and that's a natural weak point, and eventually it'll break, or can break. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to break in everyone's rifle, but the potential is there for it. So I've got it in 3 different rifles here. I've got it in the Waffen Works, the Wasser, and my Definitive Arms Vepr. And I haven't had a break, obviously, or I would have known about it by now. But after getting them open and looking at them, I'm definitely having a problem in all 3 of these rifles. The worst one would probably be the Vepr here, because instead of rivets they use screws, and they're raised much higher, and my screw in the back is taking one hell of a beating. So it's probably going to break soon. Important to know, on this rifle here I have probably about 2,200 rounds in it with the ALG trigger in there, and it's still going, but I am concerned about it. These 2 rifles, less than 1,000 each. Most interesting one though, and the concern of like how broad spectrum this is for affecting people's rifles. That Wasser, that rivet, I know you can't, I'm not even going to try showing it on the video here, I got pictures at the end that you guys can see. But that rivet is turned down about as far as you can go without rendering it useless, and it is still getting hit. And not just a little bit either, I mean it's marring it up pretty good. Now for the fixes, first one is the one being recommended by ALG themselves, and what they are saying to do is file down those rivets. Now, I don't really want to mess with a gun that costs a few $100s to well over $1,000 for a $50 trigger. That's just not something I'm going to do. So the next fix is one that some people are doing now. I know Rob Ski from AK Operators Union shared it recently, and what they're doing is just cutting this tail off. I did it on this one here, and I'll have pictures of all this, like I said. Now that does work. I'd say take just enough off to clear that rivet. Be careful about how you do it, not getting it too hot, because you could exacerbate the weakness of that hole in doing so. And theoretically, everything should be fine with that. Now, my one problem is there's still that weakness, there's still that hole there, and if you look at the trigger when it's assembled, it still will impact on the rear housing of the trigger. Granted, it's got more space to move now, there's not leverage from that tail, so it should be fine, but I don't like that, and I'm not going to be doing that. So the fix that I came up with, and I thought of this a few days ago, and didn't really talk to anybody about it. I wanted to actually try it out, put it in all these rifles, everything I could test it in, fire rounds, open it up, look at it, make sure it was not only functioning correctly, but there wasn't any signs of stress or possible damage coming out of it before I told anybody to give it a shot. And what I did was I looked to the old Tapco G2 trigger, which a lot of you probably have laying around if you have the ALG, because a lot of rifles come with them, all 3 of these did. And if you look at that, the disconnector doesn't have that tail. That hole's not there, and it's actually a bit beefier piece of metal, to be honest. Kind of weird to say that Tapco might have a better product, not in trigger wise, but just this disconnector. So I took some measurements and thought I might be able to just put this in the ALG trigger. And I did, and it has been working great. I've fired all these, I've tested them, I've checked them out. is working fine. And all you got to do that is you just pull this tube that they have holding it together. And it is kind of, excuse me, furnace turn on. I don't want that to get too loud. Sometimes it can be a little tough to get it out of there. But anyway, you'll want to keep that because that does help quite a bit. And I know you can't see this on the film, but I mean, just plain eye, you can see they match up pretty well. One thing that's important to note though is that the spring on the Tapco is much longer than the one at ALG, so you'll want to keep that with your Tapco disconnector. The next thing is when you actually put it in your ALG trigger, you'll notice that the hole, the pinhole there, is much larger than the trigger. That's for that sleeve. So what I did is I took that, you can do a measurement out if you want, I just mark it off, put it through there, marked it the right width, because that'll clear the housing of the trigger just fine. It's a little bit greasy because I've been shooting these guns. And then cut that section off, and you'll want to put that in there like a bushing. I already have one cut here, just for the example. Get that in there. These tubes are very soft. You're going to mash them up probably working with them, but it's real easy. Put them back on the pin, just tap them back out smooth. And you can just install it back into the ALG trigger. Anyway, you can get it right in there just fine. Works good. I've had it in all these rifles. In fact, this one I have it in right now. I left it to show. It's obviously clear. Reset just fine. Without holding the trigger. There. So, and like on this one here, I already opened this one up because I was shooting this, and there's no signs of damage, anything, no fracturing, no stress from like being out of spec with the trigger itself. Now, I don't have any triggers like Arsenal triggers to check out. I think they might be about the same from what I gather. Wish I had some to play with. I wish I had some other variants to test out, but this is all I got at this point and everything's running fine. So if you do this fix, I would use caution. You know, take it easy, check it out, make sure everything's fitting fine, you're not doing anything detrimental to the rifle itself. I wish I had all the variants tested, except for IO, you know, fuck those guys. Anyway, that's all I got. Alright, here's a close-up of everything I've been talking about. First we have the regular ALG AK trigger here. And if you see, this is that tail on the disconnector I've been talking about. And you can see how far, when you depress it, it actually comes down here. And that's where it's hitting on that rivet. Now, the first fix, or the second fix we talked about actually, first fix to the trigger would be to remove that tail. And that's what I did on this one here. As you can see, no longer comes down past that trigger. But like I said, you still have that weak point. Show it here. Sorry about my voice, by the way, I've been fighting the plague. So there you can see everything a lot clearer. There's that tail we were talking about, and you can see right there where it's hitting on that rivet especially. The back here, there's a little bit of a ledge, and that's what connects to the bottom of the actual housing of the trigger when it resets within itself. Now, for example, here is the Tapco G2 fully assembled. You notice it does not have that tail. There's not that hole like we saw on that ALG disconnector. And all around it is, like I said, a thicker piece of metal. So the fix that I was talking about is simply remove this tube, which is important, so keep it, and remove the disconnector. I also mentioned the spring. If you look, it is quite a bit longer
than the ALG. So you'll want to keep the longer Tapco spring with the Tapco disconnector. Also, like I said, the hole for the trigger pin is larger. That's to account for this tube. So what I did was took that tube, put it through, and cut. You can just mark it with a Sharpie or whatever. It doesn't have to be exact, but cut the width of the disconnector, which I already did right here. And you're simply going to install that as a bushing so that you still have that fill space around the trigger pin. And you take your ALG trigger and your longer Tapco spring, remember, make sure you have that, and you assemble it the exact same way as you would the regular ALG. Picture it's going in the rifle obviously right now. Slide that pin through, it's a little hard with the spring. Of course not on videotaping, I'm no trouble. There we go. So there you have it. Assembled with that. No weird play or anything, because you got that bushing in there now. And of course I did polish the top, which you should probably be doing anyway with any trigger. And that replaces your standard ALG, as long as you have the G2. Alright, here's a quick demonstration of the Tapco G2 disconnector installed in the ALG trigger, just to show that it does function correctly. Alright. Fast reset. And we'll do a slow reset. So no gap in it whatsoever.